Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Neuroplasticity Alliance's Therapy Innovation Summit 2022. I'm your host, Sherry Odom. It's a real honor for me today to bring you a conversation with Paul Madaule and Rosalinde Pecino from the Listening Center in Toronto, Canada. The Listening Center uses electronically modified sound, such as voice and music, to stimulate and develop those areas of the brain that specialize in processing auditory information. You'll hear Rosalinde and Paul today talk about the ear as an extension of the brain rather than as a separate body part because of the fundamental role it plays in voice production, speech, language processing and development, finding your balance, motor control, and just general physical conditioning. You might not know that inefficient sound processing is a root cause for many of the learning differences, such as dyslexia, auditory processing, ADD, ADHD, autism, and sensory processing disorder, plus more. But the good news is that the Listening Center can address these and more difficulties with their sound stimulation program. Like many of the speakers you'll hear from in this summit, Paul came to neuroplasticity and his sound stimulation program through his own personal need. Paul was severely dyslexic as a young child and struggled academically. He only found academic success after going through one more therapy, one more last-ditch effort to try something new, which was a sound stimulation program developed by Dr. Alfred Tomatis. It worked wonders for Paul, and he soon became a trainer for Dr. Tomatis, traveling the world, helping other people with similar challenges. He did this while pursuing his degree in psychology from the University of Sorbonne, and in 1978, he and Dr. Tomatis opened the Listening Center in Toronto. Paul has continued to work there, and over the last 40 years, he's refined this program through his own clinical experience by adopting and research and new technology. And he has detailed all of that experience, his early years as going through dyslexia and managing that process, using the sound stimulation program, and the science behind Dr. Tomatis's program in that book. He is joined by Rosalinde Pecino, who is a listening training consultant at the center. Rosalinde's job there is to help people go through the program on a day-to-day basis. She helps set the pace and the schedule and monitors their progress closely to adapt as needed. Rosalinde's background is in fine arts, and she has master's training in expressive arts therapy and psychology. She uses her knowledge in psychology and human development, combined with her passion for helping others in her work on a daily basis. And from a personal standpoint, I have to mention that Rosalinde really has the patience of Job when it comes to helping children through this program. I also want to say that this program has a very special place in my heart because it helped me with my daughter who was diagnosed with dyslexia, dyscalculia, auditory processing, ADD, and several other issues. She went through the program and it really changed the trajectory of her life. She's now a captain of her cheer team. She's a junior prefect at the school that she attends. She's making straight A's and she's in advanced math. I am a proud mom for all the accomplishments she's made, but I tell you this so that you also can understand the benefit of this program if your child is a good fit. Rosalinde and Paul, thank you so much for joining this summit today. I'm eager to get into our conversation. Welcome.
Thank you. Hello.
Thank you
Thanks
very
for
much.
having us.
Thank you very much for inviting us.
Well, I'm excited to share your story today with the population who is joining us because it's near and dear to my heart, as I've already said. But let's start, Paul, with maybe sharing some of your background. Can you give us a good understanding of how you came to be interested in sound therapy and how it's made such an impact in your life?
Well, it's a long story. First, because I'm no longer young, and it really something which started very early in my life, as early as I started going to school, and specifically starting to read. I remember I was in this kind of school in the old fashioned, where when you were not reading well, people were tended to make fun at you. I remember my teacher sitting me in front of the class and giving me fake glasses and asking me, yeah, she was a nun, by the way, asking me to read out loud to the class, which means that you can imagine that even if I had a little bit of an ability to do it, it didn't come out. And reading, in fact, was, when I look at it in in retrospect, was only one of the aspects of the difficulty I had. I had difficulty with writing. I remember spending hours trying to write uh, lines, trying to do all the things that some people consider being obvious. Writing horizontally, writing with shaping the letters. I remember all this, and it didn't work out. And the funny thing, and that is interesting for me, it has been interesting all along because I've seen it over and over. I wasn't very bad in drawing. I could not just put the end together when it had to do with language. And that is something that, of course, we will understand later. I will understand later. Anyway, I went through school. I was failing grade after grade, with good support some years, not as good support others, with good support of my parents trying to give me all the programs possible at the time. We were in the 60s in France, until I basically dropped out. I no longer wanted to go back to school. I thought that perhaps I could become an artist and so on. And it just happened that it was a place not very far from our town, which was a monastery. And it was a place which was peaceful, of course, where people had all the time to talk, and where they were practicing, some of the monks in the monastery were involved in doing some art, tapestry, or stainless windows, stainless glass. And I was interested in going, helping out. It was basically a bicycle ride from my town. I was going there. And it just happened that one of the monks one day come home and said, Paul, you should come with me because there is someone that I think you should meet. And this someone was Dr. Tomatis, who at the time was working in that monastery for completely different reasons. But because he was there, away, like we were talking about 8 hours train at the time from Paris, he was spending a few days in the monastery, and in the evening was, after finishing his work with what he had to do, he was one day gave a lecture of the work that he was doing in Paris at that time. And it was a course that he was giving about dyslexia and the importance of the ear in helping children with what we called at the time dyslexia. Right now we will call it more learning disability, language-based learning disability. And that is when I met the person who became my therapist, then my mentor, and then my colleague, because we worked together many years. But to start with, Tomatis asked me to come to Paris and to do his program, which was very much wearing headphones and listening to music, and then send me to England, which I had been before. Say, go to England in order to learn English a little bit, because that's going to help you with your studies. And I said, oh, I don't really, I was shy. I had already a difficulty with my own language. Imagine the second one. I had done the England thing like many young French people do. I was not very enthused. And I have to say, I had the time of my life. I had the months of my life in England relating to people, communicating, making jokes in a language which was not even mine, making people laugh. This was totally different. That was another Paul. And I come back and then went back to Tomatis and he told me, okay, well, how did it go in English? I said, I loved it. I said, okay, now that you had a lot of fun, time to work. He organized to put me in a boarding school close to Paris in order that I could continue his program on weekends and so on. And 2 years later, I was not only back on track at school, but I had my baccalaureate, which in France means the go-ahead to go to university. And after a discussion with him, I decided to go to Sorbonne, which was a university in Paris, and to study psychology. And as a side work, I started working in the clinic of Dr. Tomatis. And that, I was 18, 19 years old at the time. And I'm still doing the same work. I just do it in another language. I do it in another place. I have done it in, name it. Before 30 years old, I already worked in 3 continents, including South Africa, several places in Europe, and in 3 languages. I've also worked in Spain and later Mexico, which means that I have become a kind of spokesperson of a work that I very strongly believe in because it has done so much for me. And since then, I've been reinforced all my life by seeing the result obtained with other hundreds, thousands and thousands of other people that I've been able to help through this work, which is basically that what we are going to talk about today.
Paul, that is a really inspiring story. And it changed the trajectory of your life. I can imagine your parents being very thankful for you having gone through that experience after having, tried so many different things and struggling so much. And that obviously inspired you, like you said, to help thousands of other people. What is the number? Do you have an actual number of people that you've helped and that have been through your clinic or through your lifetime?
It's a good good question, because not only did I work at the listening center in Toronto, but I worked in other places. I worked a lot in Mexico, developing several centers in the 80s and the 90s. But I will say, considering the number of, I have to think a little bit because I don't want to exaggerate, but I think we're talking about in the 5,000-6,000 people that I've been involved in working with. Usually I work as a team, which means not like I worked with 5,000-6,000 people, but through the listening center and other places I've been working, yes, that will be the number.
Yeah, and if you put a multiplier on that for those people that they have been helped, it's a tremendous impact that you've made. I've mentioned in the introduction that I have been through this program, and one of the things, or not me personally, but my daughter, and one of the things that I was struggling with as I was researching your program and trying to really understand, how it was going to benefit us and whether we were a good fit, quite frankly, was the difference between listening and hearing. And I think that's a really critical piece of information that our listeners need to get right up front as we go further into this conversation. So can you walk us through what that means and how they're different and what that means then for the program?
Okay. Well, yes, it's a good question, and it's. I'm going to try to make it simple, but I understand that the word listening sometimes is not well understood by people because they have already a preconceived idea of what listening is. But to make it simple, I will say hearing is a passive is basically the reception of sound. What in your environment, even when you think that you are in a silent environment, your hearing is open and you receive information all the time. Listening is what you are going to take out of what you are exposed to, which means that listening is an active, it's basically a much more brain, I will even say motor function. It is the motor function of connecting your ears, perking up your ears, which happen with some animals, to receive the information you want. And as a result of that, leaving out those information you do not need, which means that in the listening, there are two things which happen, is taking what you need, leaving out what you do not need. And in the different type of listening problem we see a combination of the two. For example, in general, in the case of ADHD, people who have short attention span, they have a difficulty picking up what is necessary for them, what is meaningful for them, what the teacher says, for example. Some other people seems to be in noise all the time. They cannot, and I do that in purpose because it happens to quite a few children, autistic or not, by the way, in early life, in order to give themselves a little bit of a break of all this sound environment, they close their ears when things are too loud, when things are too much. And there are some children who do that even when it is not that loud, even it is not that for other people's perspective. But in their perspective, they have this kind of overwhelming stream of information coming to them that they are not able to cut off. This is also a listening problem, which means listening problem is both the inability to take what you want and the inability to leave out what you do not want or need. And
Okay.
the program that we are developing is to improve that function, is to make this ability to focus on auditorily, attuned to the information you need better, clearer, faster.
Okay. And then how does that differ really from auditory processing? Because I think what you just said makes me think, okay, well, it's processing the information that it's coming in.
Yes, you're right. It is, in fact, there are a lot of overlap in the definition of listening and the definition of auditory processing. Keep in mind one thing is that when we were trying to explain listening, the concept of auditory processing was not out yet. Tomatis didn't, and plus we come from a French culture. We did auditory processing is something that I learned later, and in fact, it was a very welcome opening to what we are doing. It was bringing, quote unquote, the science to what we knew intuitively and clinically. There are other factors, though. In auditory processing, one talk only about the auditory system. And auditory processing is usually presented as a cognitive function, which means that it's the brain which listens. And I agree with that. But the brain only can listen what it receives, which means that it is the brain in connection with the ear. This is kind of dialogue between the two, a sensory cognitive loop, which has to be worked on, which means that that makes the definition a little bit different from the auditory processing definition. There is another factor that is from clinical practice that we observe all the time and that people are aware of, is the ability, the connection that there is between sound stimulation and movement, rhythm. There is science behind that. there is an explanation behind that relationship between auditory and movement, which is so much in the heart of music, for example, is that the ear, the inner ear, is both a system of reception of sound, very, the waves, very quick waves that we perceive as sound, but also the reception of movement, which movement, awareness of movement, awareness of our movement of our body in space, the awareness of the gravitation, all this relationship between the body and the environment is also part of our definition of listening. We call it the listening of the body. And this is very important in a skill which require not only an auditory skill, but also movement. The movement of the hand when you write, the movement of the eyes when you read. This is all related for us to the listening function through a system that we call the vestibular system, which through the cerebellum control or is related to the movement of the eyes, is related to the movement of the hand, etc., of the arm, of the body, etc.
And so I guess this is why you're so passionate about the fact or the motto that you have is that the ear is an extension of the brain and not just another body component.
Exactly. It is an extension of the brain. It is the part of the brain, and not just the ear, but we have to understand that it's through the ear that we develop language. Which means that it is really our best. It is our best connection with our communicating brain and the world around.
Yeah. And how does your program impact all of these? Because it's, as you said, it's the vestibular system and it's the listening, it's the processing of the sound. So it affects so much of our individual performance as a human from a cognitive standpoint, but also from a physical standpoint. So how does your program then affect all of those components?
Well, our program is really very simple in a way, in its general principle, is to use sound stimulation, mostly music. I'm going to talk about music because it's simpler to understand what music is, which is a combination of frequency and a combination of rhythm, which has been developed by people that wrote this music, have been able to develop it because that's the way it comes to them. And then the players is going to use this system that I'm talking about, which is connecting, for example, in violin, connecting the listening to the sound and the movement, okay? And we are using music, like many other techniques use music. But what we do with this music is that we, in a way, we slice it. We modify it with electronic filters to make the person listen in the range which is not perhaps as clear as it should be in that general perception. When we hear a sound, particularly a sound of language, what we have to understand is that we do not hear just one sound. We hear a range of sounds. It's like a sandwich with different layers of sound. And if you change these layers, make some thinner, some bigger, well, basically you change the hamburger, you change the sandwich. It's not the same anymore, which means that the same word can be perceived differently if this overtone range, if this range of harmonic of the sound, of the complex sound of language is not perceived well. What we are trying to do is to make this perception as clear and as fast as possible for the child to hear what is really receiving and not to try to interpret through uh, through a, you know, a mixture of sound, what it is that perhaps it's coming to his ear. Because that is what very often happens to people. They spend too much of their brain power to interpret what they are receiving instead of just be there and receive it.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's helpful. And I think it's a good point in our discussion really to explain really the assessment that people go through and coming in, so that, because you mentioned that the sandwich contains a bunch of different layers, right? And
Yeah.
so that's, I assume, how you're referring to how our brain is processing that input. It's looking at those different pieces and trying to interpret and perceive that information, but sometimes our brains don't have the capability to interpret or perceive some of that information. And I think that's what your initial assessment really gets at. Am I correct?
Yes, you're right. You're
Yeah.
right. What we are trying to find out is that, does the person that come to us and ask, can you help us? Can you help me? Or can you help my child? Does this person fit the criteria of what I'm trying to describe? Which means that does the listening function is clear enough and is fast enough? You know, in auditory processing, they are talking about delayed or slow auditory processing. People, in our translation of that is listening too slowly. If you listen too slowly, you spend your time catching up. While you are trying to hear word number 3, people are already talking about word number 6 in a sentence of 20 words, which means that you have two possibilities. Or you start daydreaming because you lost, or you misinterpret, which means you answer something which is not what has been asked, or you think that you understood, but it's not exactly what it is that you were told, etc. And our assessment is trying to find out what it is, or if that is the type of problem these people have, amongst others, because people come to us with ADHD, with particularly, a lot of people we see have ADD or ADHD. What does that mean from a perspective of listening? Is that they very often do not have the ability to focus for long enough period of time in order to get the full message, which means that it looks like they have a short attention span, and they do. I'm totally, the brain does not respond well. What we have to see is that do what they present may have to do with the listening function or not. And that is an example of what we are trying to find out with a program.
So what does this assessment entail then?
I think there are many steps, I would say, to how we assess who we feel is a candidate for the listening training program. First step is that we receive a listening checklist from people who are interested, which is something that can be found on our website. And that right off the gate gives us an in-depth look into the issues that people are having as they are related to the listening function. So we have several different areas that we look at. We review it as a team, and if we feel like this is worth exploring further, then we will offer an assessment. Sometimes we actually have more questions, and we'll have a conversation with the person who's interested and really get to know them a little bit more. And then in the assessment, it's quite an in-depth look into whoever it is that we're assessing. We have a questionnaire that we ask the person or the parent to complete, which looks into the developmental history of the person. We have an in-depth conversation about their history, what they're currently experiencing. And I think what's really important for us in the assessment is that it gives us the context of who this person is, where they're coming from, what the family situation is like, what the home environment is like, because we feel, it's part of our clinical responsibility to ensure that if we're going to recommend this program, we're confident that it's going to work. And not just because, the program works, and many people can benefit for different reasons, but the home life has to be a safe enough or predictable enough environment for the program to be effective. So we talk about things like, how many hours of listening per day do we think would be the best fit for this child or this adult? We talk about our recommendations. We come up with very specific goals as to why we're recommending this program and what we feel like it can realistically do. Throughout the assessment as well, we give a person a pretty concrete idea as to what they can expect in the program. So we like to frame it for the people. And then I guess, I don't know if we're going to talk a little bit more about what the program then looks like, but I will continue and say that we are very, very involved in the whole process. We really try to create listening center at home. Part of what Paul has done for Listening Center is, really, really making sure that the counseling aspect is there. It's not just, here's a program, good luck. We really want to be involved. And I think our role as consultants is really important to help guide people along the way. We're always available through a phone call. If someone has a clinical question or a technical question, we are there to support. We have regular reviews throughout the program too, to ensure that things are going accordingly. We talk about what changes they're noticing, and we help to provide that context as it relates to the program and their listening skills. And then as well too, once the program is completed, we also have follow-up. So we stay in touch 3 months post-program, and then depending on the person, 6 months down the road or once a year. And sometimes too, people feel that they want to continue with the program, and we have shorter programs that they continue down the road as a support to continue to facilitate development.
Thank you, Rosalinde. That is really helpful, and I know from personal experience that there is a lot of discussion up front as to whether you would be a good client fit, and looking at that support system, and also just the profile of what an individual who is considering this has had from an educational standpoint and support. And by education, I mean not only traditional education, but other support systems that have been tried and applied, and the effectiveness of those as well. Yeah. Maybe this is a good point, Rosalinde, then, since you brought it up, really just to kind of go through and explain what the program looks like on a day-to-day basis, since I know that's in large part where you spend a lot of your time.
Mm-hmm. I think, should we talk about the home program now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Perhaps what I'm going to say first is that there is a transition between the assessment and the program. For many years, we were using a test called the listening test, which is something we got from Tomatis, which was basically an audiogram modified in order to look at those strengths and weaknesses in the different frequency range of the ear. Now that we work mostly in home program, we systematically use another tool that we have developed more than 23 years ago, which we call the listening questionnaire and listening wheel. The listening questionnaire is basically taking, in the form of questions, all the issues that we hear about when people talk about listening difficulty. I have a short attention span. I have too much of a time lapse between hearing something and responding. These kind of questions. We identify about, to be specific, 96 questions, and we separate this question in different area, which are going to give us two general levels. The receptive level, how does a person respond to information coming from the environment, which we call receptive listening, and then how does a person express himself, which is we call expressive listening, because basically we are the first listeners of our own voice, of the way we speak. If I was now closing my ears for 5 minutes and try to talk, I will start having changes I will hesitate more in the way I speak, because my auditory system will not control me very well, which means that we are looking at the receptive system, we are looking at the expressive system, and we are looking at it at 3 levels. The level which has to do with the auditory sound. How do we receive sound information? The level which has to do with movement, the vestibular, children who fidget, the children who tend to have difficulty in focusing with the body, if you want. And then, and sandwich between the two, the visual level. How do the people follow information with the eyes, and as it related to the way they listen to the word, the sounds of the word, like can they translate the sound into letters? We are looking at questions having to do with this. And then we also look at another section, which is how do people, what the ability of people to protect themselves from what I was talking about before, from unwelcome sound. People who tend to hear too much, people who are overly distracted in a classroom, which means that we have all these questions. These questions bring us, in fact, a certain number of what we call listening profiles. Profile 1, profile 2, profile 3, profile 4, profile 5. We look at, many of people have either 1 or 2 or even 3 of those profiles. Based on those profiles, we are going to develop a sound program, which means a sound which is going to permit us through a modified music to slice the sound in a way which is the most helpful for the person. And then we will decide if the problem is mostly receptive, the sound program will be more receptive. If the person does not have that many receptive issues, but for example, has a difficulty reading, we will jump very quick in the sound program to what we call microphone work, reading out loud, listening to yourself reading under the supervision of Rosalinde, of one of the staff member of the center. We can do that by Zoom, and that will be the purpose of that program, which means that based on the profile of the child and with an understanding of what Rosalinde was talking about, the context of the person, we are going to develop a sound program and a support system specific to the need of that specific person, Sorry, I went a little bit technical here, but I want people to understand that we do not just take people, make them listen, and hope for the best. There is a logic in the program that we are recommending.
Yeah, I think that is really good that you took the time to describe that logic, Paul, because it's not a concept individuals have, who are lay people, and they don't understand how this program really works. And so I think that gives them a good understanding, and they know if it's for their children, right, what their specific children's challenges really are. So I'm sure that some of that resonated with them individually. So once you determine whether the child has receptive or expressive issues, then what next steps would you take? What would the program look like?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would like to say too that we always start receptive. We always start receptive, even if we identify that there is a receptive or an expressive issue. The receptive listening is really the foundations. And we feel it is so important first to start with the foundations before we go to the expressive. We think about that audio vocal loop that Paul was talking about earlier, that oftentimes we are emitting or expressing what we are hearing or receiving, processing, right? So if there is an expressive issue, we like to go back and work on the receptive, because we feel that there is such a strong connection between those two.
In other words, we go back to the original steps of the development of the listening function.
Exactly.
Okay, we just go back, reinforce every step, because even if there is expressive, big, like a mountain, and receptive, not very obvious, we know that at one stage of the development, something was not established well, and we have to reconsider it, reconstruct it, if you want.
So your program today is 100% remote, is that right?
Yes,
Yeah,
since
okay.
COVID, we only work with home programs. Now, home program is not a new concept for us. Because we are working with people coming from all over the map, all over the world, and Canada is a big country just in itself. We have always had a program. I mean, always in the last more than 20 years, we have had a support program that people can continue at home using a portable piece of equipment that we developed that we call the LIFT, Listening Fitness Trainer. And that has been the way we have been working for many years. People don't have to come to Toronto several times. They can continue. We know them, we have assessed them. They will continue with the home program. Since COVID, we didn't really know in the beginning how we were going to handle people asking us for help. We decided to do that was new for us, to do the initial assessment by Zoom using this listening wheel I was talking about before, which really helped us to develop the program necessary for each individual. We send the equipment at home. Rosalinde will explain how all this works. But what I can say is that now that we have done that for close to 3 years, we are very satisfied with the result we get through the home program, as long as it's done in a certain way. And this is an important part. It has to be done in a certain way to work. And for now, we do not have any thought about going back to a centers program, considering that most of our clientele is coming from out of town, and people have changed. People now, when we tell them the only service we can offer you is a home program, they say, oh,
They're
thank
relieved.
you. They're relieved, which is the post-COVID mentality. And I don't see that changing in the near future, which means that is the way we work. And in all honesty, if it was not working well, we will not do it. We do it because we convince ourselves, and it took a little bit of, it took COVID to convince me that it is a feasible alternative to continuing the program. Now perhaps you could explain how do we go, what the step by step after the initial assessment.
Sure, yes, yeah. So in the assessment, once we've identified this person's a candidate, we know their profile, we've set our goals, we've talked about how we're going to structure this program into this family's daily life, we start. So what's involved with that is that we send the family this equipment, we lease them our equipment, the LIFT device. It's a small device, about 6 by 8 inches, portable, it's lightweight, and then there are headphones that are connected by a wire. So when they receive the equipment, I usually meet with them on Zoom. We talk about how to use the device. I show them how to set the adjustments, that there will be adjustments that need to be made throughout the program according to the sound program that I've designed and I send to the family. It's a piece of paper, and it's written out and they follow it. So it's something they have to refer to every day. Once the family has a good understanding of how to use the equipment, and we've talked about, if needed, some strategies on how to get the child into a routine and listening every day, which can take some transition time, especially depending on the child. So giving those tips and tricks and strategies, the family starts. We have a clinical meeting about halfway through the program to talk about what they're noticing, how things are going. We talk about any questions or challenges that they're having. They continue with the program, and then we meet again at the very end. And then at that point, we decide to take a break, which is what we call the integration break. It usually lasts about 4 to 6 weeks. And it's very, very important to give the brain that time to settle and to integrate what it's received from the stimulation, start to put those skills to work, to really exercise what it's received. we meet again at the end of that integration break virtually to talk about what they've noticed now since ending the program and giving the brain that time. And quite often, we see a lot of that movement and progress following that integration break. It really needs that time. And then it's in that meeting that we discuss, okay, what are we noticing? And do we feel that this is enough to merit continuing to the second step of the program, which is the expressive phase? So then once we decide that, yes, we're going to continue to the second stage, we start. And what the expressive phase is we start to introduce microphone work into the program. So it's a combination of listening and usually about 30 minutes of daily microphone work. And depending on the child, it can look very different. It could look like, a toddler, we turn the microphone on and it's picking up any kinds of sounds that they're making, babbling, jargon, whatever it is, to meeting virtually with a person every day on Zoom, and we're doing reading out loud exercise together for 30 minutes together. So that it really depends on the person. And then again, yes, we meet throughout regularly and have another review at the end.
For the microphone work, are you using your mobile phone, or how is that coming from a technology standpoint to be integrated?
So the microphone is connected to the headsets. It's all included in the device that we send to the family. Again, I show them how to use the microphone. And when we meet virtually, person is there with their headphones on, their microphone in front of their mouth turned on, and we're just interacting over Zoom usually.
And Rosalinde, each of those two sessions are what, about 2 weeks, you said?
It depends. It depends on how many hours per day we're doing. So it varies. If the least intensive program would be 1 hour of listening a day, to reach the 30-hour mark, it would be a 30-day program. The most intensive we would do would be 2 hours of listening a day, which would be 15 days. And then the halfway point, an hour and a half of listening a day, would be 20 days of program. So
okay, so overall, it's completely less than 6 months. So somewhere, between 1 to 4 to 5 months, it sounds like.
So the bulk of the program.
Yes.
But then there are, the context, the specific situations. We cannot talk the same when we talk about a child with a learning disability who is perhaps a little bit delayed at school but need to catch up. This, 4 to 6 will be enough, with perhaps some support to do some reading out loud exercise, things that we feel that could help along the way. This is different from a child in the autistic spectrum at a relatively severe level that we start helping at 4 or 5 years old. And sometimes we still continue to see them at 10, 12 years old. It doesn't mean that they come every 2 months or 3 months, but perhaps once a year, we have a boost which permits them to permit the program to give them that kind of a little push, little need they, because all transition being difficult for those children, every change being hard, it's like a mental arthritis, like it's being hard. They need a little bit of a facilitator, which means that is what the program also do in some other situation.
Okay, let's talk about age, because you just brought that up. Is there an ideal age at which you'd like to see children, or does it matter?
It matters. It matters. If it is a problem having to do with school, I think when it comes to learning ability, to learning difficulties, or school related, learning disability, it's always better to help a child. Always, not always, interesting enough, but it's usually better to help a child before reaching puberty, pre-puberty, before 10, 11 years old, while the child is still very much influenced by his environment. What mom and dad or teachers say, it still has some clouds. Then comes the phase which we all know very well, where the child wants to be himself, when the child wants to be an adult, but still do not have all the ingredients to be an adult. And that is going to be a difficult phase sometimes to help them, particularly if the program is interpreted as a will of the parents, the will of the system. We have sometimes some difficulty with those because of that. But sometimes it's the opposite. A child who says, I really want to make it. I really have, a vision of what I want to be, and I'm frustrated like hell because I cannot get there. This is a good candidate later, which means that it's difficult to say, general rule, earlier, better, but it's difficult to say when. It all depends of the individual. Now, more general rule though, is that for all children, and that's many that we see in the spectrum, in the autistic spectrum, always global developmental delay spectrum, we like to see people the earlier the better. And when I say early, if we could start at 2, we even now that we can do home program, we even started a couple of them at 1 year old, when the diagnosis is so clear because there is a physical neurological issue that can be identified. You don't need a lot of assessment, you see it. And what do you know? You need what is a child needs. He needs stimulation, needs clarity, he needs support, and that our program does very, very well in those situations. We haven't talked too much about that because but it's really another application of the sound stimulation program. In this case, the earlier the better. That said, I can talk to you about wonderful results with people who come to us at 40 years old. In fact, we might talk about that if we have some time. Why not?
Yeah, actually, sorry to cut you off there, Paul, but yeah, why don't we go into that? I mean, if you have some patient stories and that you could share to demonstrate the before and after, that would be fantastic.
Okay, well,
Yeah,
you could start
about
with
this
yes.
40-year-old. It's interesting, talking about being a part of someone's life for years, even beyond their program. We worked with this woman. She was in her early 40s. We started working with her in 2020. She started at the center, and then she was one of our first home programs where we tried, okay, we're going to give this a shot because we knew her, we were comfortable with her. Now, she came to us with really severe learning disabilities. She has been diagnosed with all sorts of nonverbal learning difficulties, dyscalculia, dyslexia, and she was really wanting to just help make things easier for her. She was working tirelessly. She was in school, taking high school credits because she never completed high school.
40 years old.
40 years old with this dream. She had this goal of being a neurosurgeon. And she's coming to us, we're working with her. We worked so closely with her. A lot of support was required for this woman. She was a wonderful, bubbly personality, but young in her way. With lots of program, we ended the program. She did, I think, 1 or 2 boosts, and we haven't heard from her in about a year. She's off doing her thing. Last time we heard, she was about to start a program to be a dyscalculia specialist with a new goal of supporting children in the school system. Okay, great. So we just received an email 2 days ago, I'll say, from this woman with this beautiful long update of how well she's doing. She completed her dyscalculia support program. She is now working in the school system, working one-on-one with children just like her. And she's just sharing her gratitude for Paul and for the listening training program. And she was saying, this would not be possible if it weren't for what she had done with her work in the center for those couple of years. It was really, really remarkable to see the update.
And something which also touched me in what she says in her email is that she become an artist too. She has been able to open up a creativity. And I can say, okay, she needed counseling. Mm-hmm. She badly needed counseling because here we had someone who not only had a very severe history of learning disability, who was 40 years old and who wanted to be a neurosurgeon. And I have to say, I believe in miracle. but there are things which cannot work. And she needed some adjustment. And I don't think, I have to say that too, because it's, trust my experience on that, it will not have sink in. She would not have accepted us telling her, be realistic, if she would not have done the program. The program grounded her, put her into reality, show her who she was and what she was capable of doing, and not continuing to live in a fantasy world where she will have systematically failed and failed and failed. And the prognosis was not very good if she would have continued like that. Which means that what's interesting is that she was the program, and I can talk about that with myself, the program put her on tracks. And then she was able to follow those tracks with all her potential, all her will, all her wanting to be someone helping other people. And I have to say, it's interesting because we received this email 2 days ago.
Yeah.
Wow. You hear stories like that, and it's not an unusual story for you. I know, but to have an adult in that situation and to really change the trajectory of their life at 40 years old, it's outstanding. Okay, what else do you have? I know you have a lot more stories. Give us another one.
Someone we talked to today, on Tuesday.
Yeah.
On Tuesday,
Yes.
someone who came back from the past, like we often have, which is the way we work, and we love that. Now is 21 years old. I'm going to tell him what is his story now, and then I will tell you why it's interesting. His story now is that just after COVID, he has to repeat his third year of media communication studies at an university close to Toronto, and finding himself in a crossroad. He has a father, parents separate, the father pushing, you're not capable, you cannot do it, you have to help your mom, go to work. And mom, I know mom since a long time, who will do everything to give an education to the kids, and basically told us, please talk to him, because he may drop out of this course because of COVID. He had to redo 1 year, etc. And I talked to him, and then when I look at his file, I realized that last time I had not talked to him, but last time we really had a communication with him since he had been a child was in 2018, at the time of grade 12, where he was also same scenario, crossing path, not knowing if he was going to work or going to study. And we gave him a little program, a little boost at the time. Never heard of him since 2019. And then this conversation with him 3 years later, same story. And I know him, and I know that he's on for next year. He's going to have his BA he's going to graduate, and he's going to have a good job. And I know that. But what's interesting is that this young man, we started helping. He's from Colombia, and he was sent to me by a center doing the same work as we do in Colombia, with a diagnosis of autism, and started the program in Colombia with the Tomatis work, did very well. But what we saw when mom immigrated with the two boys, we really started working with I would say not very, but clearly autistic child. Very slow process. The count type, the daydreamer the one who doesn't make a lot of noise, but very slow in his response, very, very in his own world. And he just needed to be connected. And the program, we gave him quite a few programs, I would say about 4 or 5, I would say 2 years of work, between 6 and 8 years old, to get him to go to school, to be a good student, to be good, because you can be, You can be autistic and you can be a good student. One doesn't exclude the other. And basically did all this curriculum. In fact, mom had more problem during those years with the other son than with himself. And I just want to tell this story because it's here we have still a child who have needs. Right now, the need is just support. We didn't even recommend a program this time, just support. But we have to remember where it's coming from. Okay, this is a very good story, by the way, a very exceptionally good story of a child autistic in diagnosis autism and turning out as being a kid like any others. Really, really nice, polite. I mean, polite.
So lovely.
It's not lovely. Yes, a positive kid, let's say. Now that is one. Another one in the spectrum of autism I would like to talk about is someone we also talked to a few days ago. You know, I didn't go very far to look for case studies. It's just basically what comes every day. Is a child that we have helped with just turned 11, who we have helped since 4 years ago, I think, yes, with a diagnosis of also severe autism, who is still autistic. I have to say that is still autistic, is still not what you would expect a child to be at 11 years old. The verbalization is still very minimal, but and has done, except during the break of COVID, has done what boost on an ongoing basis. And why do I think this example, this case is helpful, is because it gives a very good idea of what each boost gives him. First of all, it gives him a reduced sound sensitivity. Every time he does, let's say this time he did about 10 hours? Yeah, 10 hours of sound stimulation, not very much. He hadn't done anything in the last 2 years, okay? Sound sensitivity decrease, automatically calmer, which means that less, less self-stimulation. Doesn't mean no, but less. Calmer, more flexible, which is big when you are a parent of a child with in the spectrum. Flexibility is a big one. And another big one, more spontaneity. Mom was flabbergasted when she saw him starting to play with 2 puppets and establishing a dialogue with the 2, not scripted, a real communication between 2 puppets talking to each other. He did it 3 or 4 times and then he lost interest. And I told Mom, just respect it, it's going to come back. This is also the frustration with kids in the spectrum, is that you see them coming with something and then they push it aside for a while. That was big. This spontaneity, imaginary play, when people know autism, it's very big, and increase verbal expression. Which means that you see a chain of events which happen in 10 hours of stimulation, which go from reduced sound sensitivity, meaning the child is not having to spend his life cutting himself off because the world is too heavy on him, it's too noise, which means that all his energy is spent trying to cut off, which means basically going back to the autistic state. We open that, automatically we see the kids coming out of the spectrum. Now, is still autistic? No question about that. But we have been able to help him along the way, every time. And we will continue.
Yeah.
We see 2 or 3 times a year. Like we work twice a year. Mom is really insisting for doing a little bit more. We do only 10 hours a time. And I accepted we're going to do 3 times a year because it's so good for him. That's one other case. Do you want to talk about it?
Yeah. Do you have another one, Rosalind?
Yeah.
Share. This is gold right here.
I do. I have a little guy. I'll talk about a little one. He's 2 years old. We started his program early this year, 2022, and so now he's finished. He's done his first intensive, his second intensive. the parents first contacted us. This child, he had a traumatic birth, and he's very delayed. He's diagnosed with global developmental delay. When the parents came to us, he wasn't making any sound. He was quiet, happy, smiley boy, but wasn't really engaging, and very, very quick to drift off in his own world. And he would get really stuck visually on things. He would like to find a place to fixate on, and then he would walk from one side to the other side and just investigate something for, he could be there for hours at a time. Really, really difficult to pull him out of that and engage with the world around him. Parents try to take him to little kids classes at the library, locally. He couldn't. He would get there and he would end up just pacing around the periphery of the room. It was just too much for him to take in being around other kids. Sensorially, very defensive. He had a hard time having wet hands, didn't want to play in the sand. He really, really difficult kiddo. Now it's amazing. Actually, this mother, she recorded a testimonial. She just can't believe what she's seen in this boy, but it didn't take long for us to see these changes, but within completing his first intensive, shortly after, we heard sounds coming. This boy was starting to make sounds like a baby would. He's starting to explore the sound of his own voice. He's more engageable. He's actually looking at his parents' eyes and staying with them for a time where they could have a little bit of a playful back and forth. He's moving now. He's walking around. He's exploring his environment. He's exploring things in different ways, not getting as stuck on one thing visually, but just more curious. It's like he's receiving the world around him more clearly, and therefore wanting to get his hands in things a little bit more. And speaking of hands, literally getting his hands in things now, not shying away from having his hands wet or from playing in the sand. He's really getting in and exploring his environment through his senses, like any child should and really needs to. It really shows us that his sensory system has calmed and it's not as bombarded by the sensory information that we're constantly around every day. He's really receiving things and processing things. They took him to a little talk class now, and he's sitting in the circle trying to do the actions to all the songs of all the other kids in the circle around him. This was a mom who was saying, of course, when she was given the diagnosis and the prognosis, it wasn't looking good, and they weren't sure if he was ever going to be that boy who would be able to engage with the world around him. But they're seeing him come to life. And she says, like, I am now meeting my boy at 2 years old. I'm actually getting to know who he is. And I'm saying that is just everything that we need to know to keep doing what we're doing. I mean, it's just amazing to see. And now from here, he's more ready too for other therapies like physiotherapy, other things that he really needs to really help him physically. That, listening training, it's part of the puzzle. But I think it's important to note with these kids with high needs, we really do feel that we're part of the puzzle. And now it's time for him to explore other areas where we can kind of put the pieces together and build him up and get him ready for something like preschool, which will start in a few years. But now we can actually have that conversation, whereas before it was so unknown.
Yeah, you're really changing lives there. And I don't know how you get through the day without a box of tissue over there, because
Now, we never get totally used to it. I mean, we can
No.
say we're used to it. That will be the easy answer. But no, it keeps us going. I mean, it really does keep us going. Like this kid, 14 years old, autistic too, well, good autistic, and having a twin sister who is very difficult because there is always the one who is doing well, and then there is the ugly little duck, and at the beginning, non-verbal, non-communicative, not really in his own world. Where I'm going to go quickly just to illustrate what we are doing with him. We see him, basically, Mom decided when we are going to see him next, and we are there, as I said before, as a support to his stage of development. last time she did a program was in August. It was particularly difficult, which is interesting. The program make him more difficult. If you are a beginner in this work, it makes you like, oh, what are we doing? What are we doing? You know, the parents are freaked out. But the mother knew better because she had done before, but she really didn't understand why it was difficult. It was summertime after 2 years of COVID, where he had stayed at home most of the time, and they were talking about putting him in, you know, and trying to make him in perfect receptive skills, understand everything. The problem is more expressive. We are going to put you in a school, which they put him in a kind of Waldorf-like school where, you know, the nature and looking at the birds and playing with after 3 weeks, they had to take him out. He was impossible. That was after the boost, impossible. They go to another school, the best in their state, you know, with all the whistles and so on. No. Say, mom really didn't know what to do. And one day he come out and say, regular school. I want to go to regular school. He's never been in regular school. What? How does he even know this word? She said. Yeah. How does he even know this word? We don't talk in those nerves. We don't talk about special need and so. Well, I say, by the way, he has a sister. Which language does he talk? You know, does he talk? Anyway, regular school, he knew that's what he wanted, and that's what he is. School has made all the adjustment and so on. The sister look at on the sidelines and say, what's going on with my brother? She's with me now. He is with me. But he has always been in those kind of, you know, school there. And he's doing very well because he knows that in order to stick to the regular school, he has to get the mark, pass the test, and he's surprising everybody. Still autistic, but in regular school. Which always made me say that learning autism is not a learning disability, it's more a social development, which is often confused into learning because the child doesn't understand the meaning of learning because it's a social skill. But if you take it a certain way, you get them going. And as we know, there are very, very good people in the spectrum who are doing extremely good job, often job that nobody else wants to do because they are so good at some very specific, and I'm sure it's going to be one of those. But I'm sure it's going to be a success story. We are still in the process of the success story, though. Not yet.
Well, I mean, I know from personal experience, you have so many testimonials on your website. They're included in your book and they're on the internet as well. All you have to do is just look. So we could talk about this for probably days on end. You could do just a separate conference call on that. But I want you, we've talked about autism, we've talked about dyslexia and this global development delay. Are there other neurological conditions that are a good fit for this? And maybe what's not a good fit, if you can narrow that down?
What is not a good fit is a child who doesn't want the program. What is not a good fit is when the parents are fighting, it's more what we call context situations. If there is a will, perhaps the worst we see are not the most difficult. There are those who don't want it. It's the 15 years old who doesn't want it. And that's going to be, we can give them all the stimulation in the world. It's going to do something, but it's not going to be applied. A little story of someone that I saw, I helped because the father was on his case and he was a good, many years ago, a good dyslexic, but he didn't want the program. He wanted to go to work. He wanted to, and he became as I remember, he became a ski bum. He described himself 10 years later, called me and said, Paul, you certainly remember me because I gave you a hard time. So yes, I remember you. You're right. Say, now I'm in California. I'm dating a girl and she's not going to marry me if I do not have any kind of diploma. And I've been a ski bum for all these years and she doesn't take that as a diploma, which means I need your help. And I
Now
helped
he
him.
wants it.
Now I
Yeah.
wanted it. Okay. Which means that that is those that we cannot help. It's not that they cannot be helped. It's because they are not in the space to be helped at that very moment. It's something in therapy which is extremely important is timing. And that's part of the initial assessment. I prefer to tell a mother, let's wait a year. We are going to be around. Don't worry. Let's wait a year. It's not the right time right now. And we, of course, we give some little advice of how we can bring him back. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes we do.
Yeah, and that's that's a key principle of neuroplasticity in general, right? You have to be able to put in that emotional state, and the drive to go forward and do that, as you've mentioned, is very key to success. And I mean, I will say, as I mentioned earlier, you guys have helped me and my family with my daughter, and that was one of the things she really, really wanted to do. She wanted it so badly because she was so frustrated. And I'll never forget, after we finished our second session, she was like, Mom, I all of a sudden, I understand all of these things that are being said around me. And it was like a miracle. I mean, talk about a box of tissue that day, right? Because I could tell it was impacting her, and all of her teachers saw the significant difference too, and wrote back to me about it, and said, what did you do? What's changed? Because, all of a sudden doing very well. And as I mentioned in the introduction, she had dyscalculia, and she's now in advanced math. So and socially, she's doing very well. I mean, she's a junior prefect for the school, which is, I never thought this was going to be her path in life, 4 years ago when I came to see you. And I'm, forever grateful, right? I can't help but talk about that as a parent and get a little bit emotional. So I did want to share that. And I also wanted to kind of bring up, now we've talked a lot about children. I want to talk about adults. You did just talk about that example there of the ski bum, and then the 40-year-old. So I know that you are able to help people who are adults. What portion of your population is adults, and is there anything different for treating an adult that you would see than treating a child, maybe?
Listening is the same. It's just that with an adult, there is more, more layers of compensation, of a belief system which has been accumulated on frustration. And, with, yes, neuroplasticity help us to understand why we can help people at all age. But it takes longer with an older person than with a younger person. But I think it takes longer, not because of the neuroplastic part of the story. It's because all the system you have put yourself together. Like when an athlete, a tennis player, has to go to the next step and has played tennis a certain way, and then has to change his way to move to the next step. It's going to be much more difficult than if he's a junior tennis player, because the habits are taken. And so sometimes compensation works very, very well, but at what cost? What we are trying to do with the program is to diminish that cost, to make life easier for the adult. We help adults not just with an history of learning disability, but we help adults, for example, with creative blocks. That's something that I always like to work with, because I like the process of creativity. And the creative block is not just I cannot draw flowers anymore, but I'm stuck in the middle of my PhD dissertation. We have see people, and we help them for that. People who have difficulty, like we have a wonderful lady who was very top in her field of design, but all her work has been basically visual, spatial, on her own. And, life going, she had to become a lecturer, and not a lecturer to 3 students, a lecturer in an amphitheater with 400 students. And she had to explain to 400 people what she really has never been able to formulate. And we helped her, and she becomes that lecturer. This to give you some example. We also help people who have difficulty in the music field. They play well, otherwise they would not be musicians, which means for us, it means that they have a good listening, which is a very good start. Otherwise, again, they will not have this musical intelligence, this musical attraction. But technically, they are they are not doing as well as they should in that range in the violin playing or in the I helped a few violinists being able to play better in the higher range, which is always a little bit difficult for some of them. Another example of someone I helped is someone who was a jazz player. Who was big band. He was playing in a big band, which means he was given his partition. Probably most of his work was from movie scores and so on. Goes in the morning, sits, have his partition, plays, his trumpet playing. Then big band disappears. He has to continue to make a living. The only way he could make a living was to become a jazz player. But jazz player very often jam. They improvise. He didn't know how to do that. He didn't have what is called in technical term audiation, which means the ability to hear himself a little, milliseconds in advance in order to know what he's going to produce. He didn't know that. He had not trained himself for that. Gave him a program and he became an improvisation was not a problem for him anymore. This kind of things. And I could go forever.
Yeah. And so back to neuroplasticity, right? So the older an individual it is, those neurons have created those habits. And what your work is doing is trying to disassemble the neurons that are around that habit and reapply them
yes.
to new habits.
Rewire the right way instead of using the wrong, not the wrong, but the less economical, the more difficult way of reaching a point. A lot of people cannot believe the number of people who are so dependent of their old habits and they're not even aware of it until they lose their job. Then they have to find another job. Then they have to work with another system, another computer system, and they're lost because their work was based on sameness and habits. They need something. People who go back to work, the nurse who has been a mom and for 5, 6, 7 years, she has to go back. But to be a nurse again, she has to take some exams. She needs the help. This is where we help people when they are adults.
Yeah. So it's almost a good boost for anybody as they're going through life and sort of taking on new challenges, which sort of brings me to another question. Do you see and treat people with dementia? Has that ever been part of your program?
Not in the listening center. We are really very much, we're talking about adults, but we still have a developmental approach. I have helped some people in aging, but I would say it's because it's not our specialty and because it requires a very specific setting, the context being very specific. They need support. They need, we do not work on this population. Doesn't mean that it cannot be helped, but we do not help with this population.
Okay, that's clear. I have gotten a couple of questions about that, so I wanted to kind of put that into the dialogue.
Right.
Well, Paul, Rosalinde, you have, I think, given our audience a really great overview of the program, how effective it can be, what works, what doesn't work. And I think we're about coming to a close. Our time is about at an end here. I'd like to give you the opportunity to sort of leave some parting messages or thoughts with our viewers today, if you'd like.
Well, for me personally, I have one thought, and I think Rosalinde touched on that one, is that we are a preparation. We are preparing the ground for the next step. The next step can be school. The next step can be occupational therapy. The next step can be speech therapy. We are not replacing any therapy. We are just facilitating, preparing the ground. I think neuroplasticity is a very good model to explain what we are doing for the child to be more able to do what he needs to do. That's the first part of my message. The second part of the message is that in any difficulty, there is a gift. In any difficulty, there is something to learn. The number of people who are doing the work we do, who have done very well, who have been able to think out of the box and all those stories, is that they have been able to turn their challenge into a gift. And that is something that in our counseling, we are using a lot and a lot and a lot. And if I was a counselor without having the technique that I am using, and I will have to make my living as a counselor, I will certainly use that. But it's so much easier that when you can give them a tool to materialize what you are talking to them about.
I think what I want to say is a little bit connected to that. Just in, people come to us and they give us their laundry list of diagnoses or tell us about their child who's been diagnosed with this and that. And while it can provide some information, of course, it can be helpful, we really, really try to just look at the child and to get to know who they are behind all those labels. It can be really limiting. And I can imagine being a child and hearing people labeling me in this way and, not seeing who I am and what I have to offer. Let's look at what this child is bringing. What's there? What's working? What are they bringing? And then we can look at, okay, and what can be enhanced? I think it's beneficial to look at a person as a whole, is what I'm saying.
And I will add to that is that convey that to the parent.
Yeah.
How many times we found someone who spent 2 hours looking at all the information which was sent to us, all the diagnosis, all the problem, and because we worked together for quite a long time, said, what kind of child are we going to see when it's coming in the office?
Yeah.
And then we see a little kid, a big, big smile. Of course, doesn't see very well. He has big glasses or whatever, but he's a kid, and we want to convey that to the parent. Cut through and see your kid. And that's what we are going to work with. That is what I think made the listening center not unique, but that is where we are good at. Focusing on the kid. I think it's good that you're talking about that.
Yeah.
Okay. That's the perfect message to end on for that. I agree wholeheartedly. You have to look at your child for who they are and not for maybe some of the challenges that they have and not worry about trying to fix them, but to help enable them. Yeah. Paul, Rosalinde, thank you so very much. And I hope to be speaking with you real soon.
Thank you.
Thank you
so
very
much.